Welcome back to Effective Education, which, by the way, that title is temporary. We are working on another name for it. My name is Joseph. I am a web media content producer with 10 years of experience under my belt. I exist in the world to help professionals like you understand and use web media to the best of its ability. I am here with Pavel Koryagin. Pavel has had a lifetime's worth of experience as a developer and is world renowned for his ability to self-learn. He has put this project together to help all of you understand how to learn in your own way and be as effective as you can. So, Pavel, do you have anything on the mind you want to share before we start today? Otherwise, let's get started.
Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Hi, Joseph. Nice to see you again on the podcast.
It's good to see you too. I maybe down the line after a few dozen episodes, we'll have a little bit more banter. But we've got so much great information we want to cover that I am doing my best to evade banter and just jump right into it. So our previous episode was about learning techniques, and we had so much to cover that we have decided that this is going to be a part 2. Maybe it'll be a part 3. We'll see how today goes. But Pavel, we're gonna pick up right where we left off. So we want to start by talking about training. It's a key element to learning, of course. So let's keep this simple. What does training really look like when we're working in the development and the programming space? And one thing that I know we talked about that we wanted to draw some specific attention to was how to manage the repetition aspect of it, and also how to manage projects while doing this too, and how maybe working on a project can be an effective means of training.
It is a simple thing to understand, but a very, very challenging thing to really implement. The learning and training of skills, and we've all been there because I think most of people who are watching the podcast once learned to ride a bicycle. It should be obvious that it is different to get the explanations and to even see how other people really ride the bicycle, and then to start trying, and then to feel that you're able to do that. That's quite a simple example because you have a very basic skill of keeping equilibrium by riding it. And the same with swimming, there could be lots of technique to learn to swim professionally, but when you only begin, it is a very basic skill of coordinating your body to keep yourself on the surface. When we switch to more complex topics like learning natural languages, so what I've chosen for myself to learn how we actually learn complex things, or to talk about how we learn programming, the skills that are required to be a good developer. We are dealing with very complex topics where you could approach it in different ways. And in fact, if you want to get advice from other people on how to learn, you will find that other people did it in very different ways. So some people graduated universities and they think that it is very important that knowledge and those years of a certain type of experience they got there. But we also have lots of people who did it on their own by learning home, or switching on some practical tasks between technologies, and that also works. Apparently, there shouldn't be the only way to do that, but there is a difference that we highlighted several times in previous episodes. The difference between different skills. For some skills and some abilities, it is enough to just know the facts. If you are basically experienced in coding, then learning a new programming language is easy because they mostly operate with the same instructions. So you should simply remember that what's called sub in one language is now called a function. And that's enough to start using this construction because it works more or less the same. However, when you first deal with the concept of function or subrouting in programming language, this could require some switch of the way how you look things. And for some people, it is enough to just explain that you have certain sequence of things, of operators, of things the machine should do, and that sequence could be extracted. And this is a function, and that's enough for them. But for other people, with some iterations of practical experience of solving very, very basic tasks for extracting functions and calling them and using them in different contexts, context is required to switch the way how they see things, how they think. And when you actually need to rewire your neural networks, it might take days. And for some really complex tasks, it may take months. And my observation was in learning languages that often, if you stop practicing, stop doing exercises, and stop touching the new language for several months, and then after that you try it again, you could be surprised how easy it is this time. You might forget something, so you're unable to start quickly. But when you try with exercises, the same exercises are much easier for you, and the things that you weren't able to understand previously that breaks your mind now seems obvious. And that's the challenge, is to build this system of repetition for yourself. Between the days when we record these episodes, I was discussing this problem with my colleague, and we were talking about how to structure this in the course, because I want to create the course or the learning environment and even the content space where one could choose what they really want based on their current level and what feels easy for them. And we talked about structuring this, and it looks more like a map. It could be a map in a strategy computer game when you discover new fields and you're free to choose where to go. You could go in various directions, and each direction is valuable for you or potentially valuable. But there could also be a difference, because if we want to create a course, a learning environment for people, then apparently it is in one hand about the discovery, because you have to deal with motivation of people to keeping them interested. Because good motivation and this feel of interest is making understanding easier. In the other hand, we need to know some certain amount of skills to show the percentage of how far are you from getting your first job, for example. There should be some percentage of that kind. So skills are about solving tasks. And one dichotomy that I mentioned is the difference between the things that you could simply know, the facts, the usable facts, and the things that you have to absorb to make it a part of you. And this second part is called skills. But with the ways how we absorb it, there are also at least two major ways. First way is that you could do exercises, and second way is that you could do practical work or some comprehensive exercises that are complex enough to resemble the practical work. These are two different ways to learn, and both of them have their pros and cons. And again, I use the metaphor of learning a language. I used Duolingo to learn Portuguese, and Duolingo uses a very, very short, isolated exercises to make you get the basic proficiency. And so you are specifically trained the particular short patterns. And that way I was able to progress very fast to the point where I was able to learn and understand some basic things. But then you cannot progress further if you're not facing the real life content. You need to face these complex sentences, complex ideas, complex dialogues, and so on, so on. And the same, we train our skills. So, in one hand, if you solve the tasks, the bad tasks could be boring, but the good tasks could be gamified and they're exciting. So this is a really important instrument to develop these basic neural networks to do this basic repetition of isolated skills, because if you solve the complex task you could overlook the very basic elements that could help you do it better or easier. Like in programming we have such skills like decomposition of tasks. So you have a vague definition of what you have to do and you have to decide what the particular steps you will have to do and extract those subtasks. If you will do that as a part of a project, of a real project, you could overlook how you actually do that, and you could do that in an intuitive way that could be really tough and not the most efficient. But if this task is separated for you and you have to do this analysis for one project without coding, for another, for the third project, then you focus on this skill specifically and you notice the ideas and the patterns that are efficient in general and for you specifically. And that's the balance that every learning venture should consider. And we should never fall into either extremes. So even if the course is structured to look like a practical work, like the course in Fox Minded, where I am a mentor, it should be formed from very basic tasks, or at some point it should be structured in small increments. But overall, it should lead to solving the real problems, to creating the real software.
I want to do one follow up, which, by the way, inside baseball, my goal is to not do like multiple follow ups because that makes it harder to get to all the questions. But I do want to try to do at least one follow up for each. The follow up that I wanted to do for this question is just on the subject of reinforcement. We mentioned, and has been a common theme on the show so far, of different things that we're working on. You mentioned you're learning natural languages. I haven't formally said it, but I've lately taken up cooking as an interest, and I'm learning to make some dishes now. Saves money because restaurants are cost prohibitive, to say the least. Now, certain things are easier to reinforce than others. Like I can reinforce my learning because I have to eat every day. So there's a very obvious need for cooking. Whereas I'm not seeing as easy a answer to that in trying to learn programming. So is there a way it can come up naturally in a person's day-to-day experience, or what do you have to do in order to reinforce exposure to it and actually have a chance to practice it in life?
This is again very different and depends on the situation of a particular person willing to learn something. Because if you're learning a language, it would be very different, and you will probably need very different tools in the situation if you have a job in the country where people speak that language that you are about to learn, or if you have a fiancé talking in that language. And the situation when you do that as a hobby and background, and that second option is my case for many languages, and where I experimented how can we actually learn in idle, because this problem is real for many people who are switching from profession because they cannot stop working, because they need salaries, they need money, and at the same time they are interested in switching. So they're limited in time, but this is still the position where you could do something. And the situation is different where you have the real tasks, you have the real team who solve the tasks with you. And now I'm talking about the programming. So, for example, you could already work in a company, or you could join an offline boot camp. So you're dedicated there, you have the environment, and you have plenty of time. And the situation where you have to find that little amounts of time, in fact, you cannot find time. You can replace something like watching YouTube or scrolling Instagram in the evening with solving puzzles. And that should be the same addictive as watching YouTube, because otherwise you will lose in the fight with your internal beast. Because your internal beast is confident that you've worked all day and now it's time to entertain. And this the reinforcement apparently works different. So in one case, you have to find the addictive techniques, and then you will still have to find some complex things, complex tasks. At some point, it will become boring, but to that point, you should have some base and feel generally confident in that area. And if you're in an offline boot camp, it could be uh, however difficult for you, but you will still do something, because very likely you won't escape from that bootcamp.
And just to reinforce something that you had said in a previous episode is that sense of problem solving when it's not directly tied to high pressure work actually has a restorative element to it, and it creates that sense of relaxation that you don't necessarily get from the high pressure work that you have to do through the rest of the day. So for people who like myself who have an 8 hour day today, and it gets to like 8 p.m. and the beast says, all right, I think you've done enough for today. Quelling that beast is a matter of doing something that satisfies it, but is also productive in the long term. And yeah, that's a challenge. It's interesting, the characterizing it as a beast. So I personally appreciate that. So programmers do experience the results of their work, but sometimes just because it either a piece of software or a simple problem has yielded a result and it's working, there still might be something wrong with it on the back end. So why is the end result not always a perfect indicator of success?
Yeah, this is the thing that is sometimes difficult to explain to the beginners. In my practice, not as a mentor who teach people, but as an employer who often hired the beginner developers, I saw some cases where people really reject to see the reality, to get the feedback that their solution is not acceptable for the team. The team won't absorb this piece of code because, and there goes justification. And they objected that it works because we wanted to show that, I don't know, red button, and here's the red button on the screen. This is the thing that the beginner developers should consider, and I think the only way to really get this skill of understanding what's important more beyond the fact that the task is solved literally. The only way to know that is to get feedback from those who already work as developers, and this is exactly called mentoring. So at the basic level, you get that instant feedback where if it doesn't run, if your software doesn't run, which makes learning how to code easier than learning many things in our world, because you often get the immediate feedback from the machine. But then you need first to accept that there is more than just solving the task literally, and then to start learning what exactly is more important. And those things are mostly related in prediction of the future and applying the techniques that makes your code easier, your product easier to understand for other people. For example, there could be some conventions of how we structure the code, and different ways to name your variables or even to use spaces in your code could be could work exactly the same for the machine, but it will read different by your team members and by you in 6 months when you totally forgot how this works or what is the internal decisions that were made to make it work, to make it solve the task. The task itself will be forgotten because I often saw when newcomers or even new team broken the software, broken and getting the complaints from users about the features they didn't even know exist in this app. Because some features uh, were never even requested by the author, by the product manager. They evolve naturally. You implement one feature, you implement another feature, and the user sees these two features as a combination that helps them solve the tasks that no one was thinking about. And then if you break one of those features because they are actually minor and no user asked for it, you unintentionally break something third that no one from your team knew existed. And that's one example where you should train that discipline and another level of skills of making your product, the code you create, the apps you create, friendly for other developers, friendly for changes in the future, because changes in the future could be very expensive if your code is poorly readable or poorly structured, or they could be cheap if you predicted exactly those changes. And the same friendly for the users because the requirements, the things that people ask you to do, your product manager mainly, uh, would never be 100% detailed. You need to use common sense to do that. And the common sense is not a thing that always with you. It is also the things that you train that grows from your erudition, from the things you've ever noticed in your life.
I just wanted to support this quickly with an example because there's an online game that I play casually, and no, that was a lie. There's an online game that I play quite fervently, and the original developer sold the game to another developer, which means that the second developer had to learn how the game works, both in the structural level, but also had to understand the code behind it. And there's a matter, I think, having respect for other developers and know that in the long form, not just another person might have a look at it, but a whole other team might have a look at it, and that team might have a different outlook. So I think it's a challenge of not relying on short-term thinking, which we need to survive on a day-to-day basis, but to be reliant on long-term thinking, which is what we need to make sure that we don't have to rely on short-term thinking in the next day and the day after that.
For the beginner developers, the important thing is to know about that dimension and to know that it should be also trained. And it is often a problem to find that dimension in courses. Mentoring includes that naturally, but some ways to learn programming without direct mentoring, or where the mentoring is done not by the actual developers but by teachers, that could be lost. We are stepping here on the ground of senior developers if we start talking about the particular examples of what to do and what's not. Because for the beginners, it is important just to know about this dimension and to find a way to get that knowledge, or at least be open. If you weren't able to learn it before your first job, to be open-minded in your first job and get a feedback to learn those things. The thing where senior developers have to deal with, there's also a contradiction that you should consider. In one hand, as there is an Arab proverb that the trail is wiser than the traveler. So the way how the software is structured could contain knowledge, and if you replace something, if you improve something, you could actually lose some very important parts. But in the other hand, you should accept that other people could create garbage as products. So if something feels as garbage, then maybe you should replace it. And that balance between that, you might misunderstand something, so you should preserve and change really carefully. And that you should change some parts completely because they're really bad. That's a balance the senior developers face. That's an interesting topic, but not for this podcast.
So the last follow up that I wanted to ask in relation to this was, do you know what you're looking for if, say, you were to identify code and say this is set up to fail in the long run, or this is going to be a disaster in the long run, versus seeing code in its early stages and saying this is looking well? Is there a way that you can distinguish what's healthy looking code versus what's unhealthy looking code?
This doesn't fall into the category of facts. The thing that we could now discuss and our listener will go and easily apply. This falls into the category of skills. So you mostly train intuition. Like in language learning, you could learn grammar, but if your mother tongue do not distinct present simple and present progressive, this will mean that you have to learn the pattern, not the explanation, because explanation won't work for you. You won't be able to use this grammar correctly. And the same with this prognosis. The future is unpredictable. There are lots of variables. And there is no senior developer who is able to predict everything. It is a game of chance that you predicted better or worse. And the more patterns, the more useful patterns you've collected, the better your predictions are. And that comes with the experience.
And what we've been talking about ties into the idea of helping people understand the bigger picture, which I I would guess that whether somebody is new to the field or experienced, having the ability to see a bigger picture is something you might have, and maybe you'll develop it, maybe you'll have it going in. But so let's assume an avatar of someone who's not seeing the bigger picture, and it ties into what we're discussing about being respectful towards other developers and making sure that your code is sustainable in the long term. So how would you help somebody see the bigger picture?
I see no better way than to remind about this and come in with examples. So we've touched the topic of making it developer friendly and future proof, but there is also other dimensions. For example, the soft skills, what is called soft skills, is in particular the ability to understand that you deal not with the code but with tasks. And what is the task? Task is the problem of some people and your change in their lives with the product you produce. Of course, in a big corporation, the real user could be invisible for you because you do only a part of the app and you might not have the idea how that will work. And it is much better in a startup because in a small team you understand the full connection between what you code and what the real users will look and feel. But again, understanding that dimension, it works everywhere because even in corporation, yes, you don't see the end users, but your product has your internal consumers. That's your colleagues who will get this solution and built into their solution, solving the problems of the users that you might not understand, but you're solving the problems of other people around you. And that's about the connection, that's about the people. And you have this dimension. Then another dimension is again the distinction between practical knowledge of what you've seen or read in the book and theory. Theory is the patterns that you use to think about what you do, and that often helps you to see the common parts in very different things, and these common parts save your efforts and improve your the velocity of your production, your performance, and that's what your employer or client could be interested. There is no general answer on how to extend the context, except that to talk about the context, to increase that erudition. I've just counted some examples of that directions, but I'm sure that there is much more, because even when we talk about what I call meta skills, the way of learning how we work and how we learn and how we do things, there are also lots of different dimensions. In one way, you could learn how to find the information. In another way, you could learn how to structure your work to work easier, etc. How to manage your emotions, and so on, so on. Again, that's all contribute, but the beginner developers shouldn't be overwhelmed, because you have some basics and really small set of skills that you should to learn to start doing anything, to find your first job. But the other skills is what pushes your glass ceiling farther up and up and up, and makes the top of the salary you could one day get higher and higher and higher.
Alter the conversation just a little bit, because I have something I'm personally curious about here that I think a lot of upcoming developers would also want to ask, which is, let's say, for instance, I had the opportunity to choose between working for a startup with a small company of less than, I don't know, 20 people versus a large corporation over 500 people. I can't see the upsides and downsides to both. Is there a better option for a junior developer working with a smaller group? You might get more hands-on, you might get more learning, you might see more immediate results. But if you work for a larger corporation, there's more infrastructure. So if you do make mistakes, they might not be as they might be easier for the company to absorb, and so you might be in a safer learning environment. So is there a preferred option for junior developers?
I can talk a lot about what is good environment for a beginner developer, but everything will break of the reality that a beginner developer is unable to determine the culture, the company they're going into, because you need some experience to ask proper questions and to interpret the answers and the behavior that you will see as an answer. And yeah, that's a problem of this kind of advice. So on average, I'm certain that a small team is much better than a big team, because in a big team you will be cut off the feedback mostly, and you will deal with lots of with the code that doesn't look really good, doesn't consider it really good, because in startup, the senior developers are often free to do what they think what's important, while in big corporation they come having already a big code base with some with a big pile of legacy problems. So, and again, the results of your mistakes will be farther. So yes, in a big corporation you are more protected, but if you're a beginner, you don't want to be a protected. That could sound as
Mm-hmm.
a contradiction, because most people want to feel protected, but that's the difference between feeling and actually being protected, because you need more feedback. So it's better to address this with your psychologist or psychotherapist, but choose the aggressive environment, because you will progress there faster. Of course, not toxic, supportive, but aggressive. I mean, the environment where you get the feedback and where you make a difference, and you see the difference of your own actions. On average, that would be much probable in a small company. So the perfect the perfect option is a small team with really strong senior developers who will work with you, because you will grow the best in that environment, that they will care about you because the team is small and they depend on you if they decided to hire you. The problem could be to find a team like that, because a small team, people who join a small venture often find that they're the only developers there. And still, that's the ability to learn, but you will learn by experiment and you won't get feedback. That's not the most productive way to do. And eventually, fast forward when you become a senior yourself, there is often a dilemma that you could find higher salaries in big corporations solving boring tasks, and really interesting, challenging tasks in startups. But startups know that this is the type of the work, the nature of the work is desirable, so the salaries are often lower, especially that startups are limited in funds and offering you more interesting, more challenging tasks.
But in the case of a smaller company, equity of some sort can at least be part of the conversation. I would not expect equity to be on the table unless you're becoming the chief programmer, if anything. So
Exactly, yeah.
I think to summarize that is also working with a smaller team means you're more likely to be invested in. So you're seen as an investment as well as an employee. So your well-being and your development is of tantamount to the success of a small team that doesn't have the resources to churn through a lot of people. So that's a really good observation.
We are talking here about the education, so we mostly want these episodes to be heard by the beginner developers, and for them, it is better to not to think about equity, income, whatever. Your income must be rather an indicator, your salary as a beginner, that you're really valuable for this company. Because if you join with no salary at all, that's also an option, but it is a worse option than joining a company with a salary. Use that only by indicator. Your goal is to grow, is to learn more in practice, and of course, this includes contributing to the company. You should be valuable for the company because that's the main part of your education, how to be
Mm-hmm.
valuable, and only then to think how to monetize your skill. You could find some interesting stock options, you could find high salary. That's up to you, but that's future you.
Mm-hmm.
The you
Yeah.
today is someone who wants to learn how to be useful and how to actually sell your achievements, your past achievements, to get the achievements, practical achievements, valuable for your employer, and how to pack them to sell your achievements to the next employer, or maybe to the same employer if that's possible.
Mm-hmm. And it's definitely a topic for another day. But the theme here is not containing your education to your time in school. There's a continuation of learning, which is one of the main themes that we've been covering. But like I said, I'm not going to open up that can of worms. We'll go on to the next question.
Probably your first job is your most important education. It is more important
Mm-hmm.
than what's preceded, and it is more important than every future education that you will get.
Yeah, because I
The
guess as
first
time
job.
goes on, you become more the teacher as well as the student too. So it's sort of time to pass the torch on. Let's jump into a learning technique in specific. So one of the ones that we wanted to talk about was the estimation habit. So what is that, and how can that be trained?
Estimation habit is a real power up, because many of us, I'd say most of us, live without the ability to properly estimate how long will the work take, and to do that, estimates connected to the real life. We could plan the refurbishing of the apartment. We could estimate the work task, and in every case it takes much more than it was estimated from the beginning. So that's a thing that I mention and I recommend, but it is fine if you won't be able to do that. However, you should definitely know that whatever you do, is it related to your work or not related to your work? When you start some block of your work or education or whatever, try to estimate what you will achieve in that period of time. Or if you have some goal, try to estimate uh, when how much resources will it get, and to write down that estimation every time. And then when you actually did what you planned, again write down and collect that statistics, because there is no magic technique you could easily understand to be a good estimator, and there is probably no good course that where you could learn how to estimate. Also, there are some articles on the internet available. However, the most important thing is the intuition. And your intuition is not a divine thing, and it is not a thing that is built into your genes. Your intuition is based on your experience. And to train it in certain aspects, you should notice those aspects. So this exercise is really hard to follow. So that's why I say it is not mandatory. You could live without it, but you should definitely know about it. And if you can, you could try it. And uh, in a distance of a few years, not months, not days, but years, you will get the fruits of this exercise.
Because you mentioned trying to say like redecorate a house and how much that can cost versus how much it actually does end up costing. So now, not everybody redecorates on a day-to-day basis, but what might be some interesting or some casual ways that people can try to estimate? Like, I don't know, say for instance, trying to estimate how many hours I would be well. I mean, if you work at a 9 to 5, kind of know that one, so that was an easy one. But what could be some ways that people can try using an estimation habit just to see how they stack up?
Everything that's around you, feelings, the forms. You say that people do not do this or that regularly, but you could do that habit of estimation to be applied to very different things. If your tasks do not repeat, for example, you need to get a driver's license. You won't be doing that many times, but
Mm-hmm.
the very process consists of different tasks. So you're looking for a school, you're filling some forms probably, uh, and so on, so on. And you could estimate that those things, because the most important takeaway is that the work do not uh, take exactly the steps that you expect it to take. There are always something is broken and you have to fix something. And doing that estimation in very different areas is just an exercise, because your brain will catch the patterns, and not only the patterns but the belief. It is hard to believe that the task to add a button, say, in the app, that's a typical little task, could take several hours, because what to add? A button is in one line of code, right? Wrong, because you have to understand it, you have to do that line of code. That's the fastest part. You have to test what you've done, and testing is often involves clicking the scenarios. You have to invest the scenarios, then you could realize what will go wrong if this button is pressed in the wrong moment of time, and you will have to invent the algorithm to handle that situation. And when you are done with the task, this is still not the completion, because you will have to deliver that task to the testers or to your manager or whoever. And then they could reject this task because you made the wrong assumptions of how that should work based on common sense. Doing estimations in very different aspects of your life makes you more wise about those totally unpredictable outcomes. You just get used to that the unpredictable outcomes happen and that they are often solvable, but they add up to your tasks on average maybe 3 times, but only on average. This doesn't mean that the particular that every task takes 3 times out of your estimation, because your estimation will change and the risks are only risks. They will be positive for some tasks. Positive risk means that if something happened, that you get the result even faster, cheaper, better. And negative risks, that's a traditional understanding of risk, when something makes you spend more or you find it even impossible to do it in the way you planned, and you should you should return to the beginning of the task, to the very task definition, and to think how to redefine the task to make it even possible.
It just made me flash back to the time four of my friends and I put our money together to buy a 3D printer. We were gonna save $100 by not having it pre-built. That was the worst $100 we've ever saved. We should have just bought the thing. It was a nightmare. Oh my gosh. So we definitely poor estimation on that one. But so this is a skill that I'm learning about for the first time, talking to you about it. And one thing that occurred to me is, while not initially, I was just thinking some things that would be on a day-to-day basis, but I can also see it extending on weekly estimations or even a yearly estimation. If, say, come New Year's, I decide I'm going to estimate, how much money am I estimating to make this year? How many trips am I estimating to go on? And just almost like having a projection for how I think my year is going to go. And then when the year goes by, seeing how that went and saying, okay, well, I had this goal and I overshot it, which was good, and this one I didn't get to it, which is bad. And it's a way of accumulating wisdom in a long-term projection as well as a short-term projection. So that's just something that I've considered too. But if there's anything you wanted to add to how you've integrated estimation habits, I'd love to hear that.
That's an interesting part of that. I'm not really strong in everything that I teach,
Mm-hmm.
and that's totally all right. When I'm strong in something, I could identify that, and I often switch to examples. Of course, I'm not coming with lots of code or architecture examples in this conversation, because I want to sound understandable for more or less wide audience. However, I should know, if I want to teach people, I should know what works for people, but this doesn't automatically mean it is easy to implement. And I mentioned that this is a very difficult to implement. So I myself studied that we are able to train it that way only relatively recently, somewhat like a year ago. And I tried to implement the exercises, and it worked for me for some time. Then it failed. So I'm not at that stage to get the fruits. That's in one hand. But in the other hand, I have more than 20 years of experience in work, so I saw how things fail. So even without this exercise, I'm much more conservative in my estimations than it was me 12 years ago and even 10 years ago. And again, my lifestyle as a digital nomad with family also contributes to this. Uh, we recently migrated from Tbilisi to Yerevan, and this time it was planned and organized by my wife. And she was surprised that everything goes wrong, and she thought that this is a sign of of destiny, that we should stay and don't move. But when we talked to her, I told you that it is it is like that every time.
Mm-hmm.
I just hide that from her, because when we traveled the last season, I was the one who do all the visas, buying tickets, booking, deciding where to book, dealing with that the apartment is much worse than it looked on Airbnb. So Yes, I
You
grow that
can
habit naturally.
you can never overestimate how disastrous a move is going to be. I basically moved effectively down the street, but it was the same country, right? I didn't have to change my passport. It was like the worst 4 days of my life.
Yeah, I do that systematically because we four, me, my wife, and kids, developed a habit that if we accommodate in an apartment or even in an hotel, we feel it as home because we had that experience for these 2 years when we left Russia supposedly forever and then found that we are free to try the nomad lifestyle because kids are on home education. And that will end sometime soon because kids are saying that yes, it was great experience, but they want offline friends, offline school.
Hmm.
So we are thinking about to settle. But during these years, really, we change the country. We accommodate in a rented apartment through the Airbnb, and that apartment feels as home. uh, I think in 2 days we are comfortable here. We know where everything, where the convenience store is, where we usually have our favorite cafe from the very first day because
Hmm.
we know how to find it. Uh, yeah, that's another interesting topic. So I don't know, maybe one day I should talk about that
Oh yeah, I already
because
wrote that down. I figured sooner or later we get to that as a subject.
that's a
Yeah.
adaptability lesson,
Hmm.
and that's applicable in a way to be happy of your life, happy of your profession, happy of your learning process. That's the same because you find what joy does this life have for me
Hmm.
and how to find what we
I
want.
have one more question that I want to ask you before we wrap up today, but there's just one thing that I wanted to say while we're having this little exchange, which is I'm not much of a traveler. I'm whatever you call the opposite of a nomad. That's me. But we did get to visit Alberta, which, for those of you who don't know, is the Texas of Canada, and one of my favorite personal experiences was actually just going out of the house that we were being hosted in, getting a cup of coffee, and coming back. It was the idea of seeing what someone else's normal life is like, as opposed to getting in the car, driving to see the mountains or going to all the tourist attractions, which is very much not what people who live there locally do every day. But to do something very normal and very everyday, to me, in a different spot, was an interesting blend of unfamiliar and familiar, and it made it feel like home in that moment. So that's where my mind was at with what we were talking about. Now, with the time that we've got, let's. I got one more question for you today, which is we I don't know where and when emotion really comes up in these kinds of conversations. I think the sort of the stereotype is emotion is kept somewhat at a distance when it comes to programming. I don't. We've talked for 4 episodes now, and I know better than to believe that, but there is a stereotype to it. So, can emotion be tied effectively into memory and training and the skills that we're talking about developing?
Yeah, yeah, you know that they are clearly connected. In fact, the emotions is something that makes us do things. If you switch all the emotions, you will be just a dead body, maybe, or having processes, vital processes, going on in your body, but you won't move because the emotion is the answer why you do something. So that idea of an emotionless person like Spock in Star Trek is a pure fiction, and it looks even steely for me, knowing the modern state of psychology, of the science of brain and psychic, especially in the context of AI. People are interested to know how it works for us because we are at that age when we need this knowledge to in practical use, not to understand but to create. And of course, emotions are connected. And we mentioned today that if you have the addiction to something, to some learning technique, that's a really nice solution in the situation where you have a daytime job or maybe main education and you want to learn something additionally. That works. That might be difficult to achieve, but you definitely should be mindful about your emotions. You should understand that this is the fuel and the control engine and everything. Uh, you could watch Inside Out to get the rough understanding how it works. Without those contradictive things, because even in that cartoon movie, it is shown as different emotions have contradictions and often not obvious purpose of their existence. And in practice, that's a solution and a problem in the same way. So addiction could be a problem if you can't stop doing something that uh, do not make you happier, because the feeling is familiar to me, and especially when I'm tired, it could happen when I want to refresh and refresh and refresh the main page of YouTube. Also, I realize that I don't want to watch any more tubes, but I'm just kind of locked, and that's a
Hmm.
problem. I'm working with my psychotherapist. But the same engine could make you learn new things. And I think the same engine makes me learning new things and then use that knowledge. Emotions are crucial, and we should be aware of them, and we should study ourselves to learn easier and faster.
Hmm. And I think this is also where gamification is one element that blends emotion with practicality, because you're being rewarded and your skills are being tested, but you're also getting a takeaway of it. And I can't believe I'm bringing this up as an example, but I'm kind of known for weird examples. But there's a arcade series called House of the Dead, which usually you just play with a light gun, but they made a version of it called Typing of the Dead, where you're learning how to type words out and you have to do it fast, otherwise you get your brains eaten out. So that I would never would have expected that, but that was a really interesting way to combine improving your typing skills while also, surviving the horrid apocalypse. So that's just one example of gamification. I think bringing in the emotion in a way that celebrates the joy of learning something as well as the joy of accomplishing something and taking down a few zombies while you're at it.
Yeah, yeah. Games are often underestimated. Many people see it as a problem, as a source of addiction or a waste of time. But hey, in one hand, the games is a new form of art. They are important part of our culture, our life. So we shouldn't overlook them. And in the other case, games are built on that triggers that are discovered that makes us keep interest, keep curiosity about something, and that triggers gamification is the word that basically means we realize that we should use that knowledge that makes us addictive to entertainment and transfer it to other areas. That's what we call gamification, and that's challenging because in the art, in the real game, you are free to experiment with this, but in the you are free to try different gameplays, but in the reality you are very constrained to what you should actually do,
Hmm.
and in between you should add the elements of gaming. And uh, there are lots of experiments, and
Hmm.
there are lots of failures so far.
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
are watching that, and I want to participate and invent some game mechanics and see how that works.
Well, if we end up doing a topic just talking about gamification, that's one episode where I'm probably going to go a little nuts. So just fair warning to everybody. But that has been an hour. So Pavel, I think we're going to wrap up for today. Did you have anything else that you wanted to make a point on, just based off anything that we've talked about? Do you have any like lingering thoughts or anything else that you wanted to make sure that you said aloud? Otherwise, I think we're good to wrap up.
We are fine. uh, the topics were fragmented, and that's mostly what I planned for this podcast because we think we talk about one element, another element. They are all connected with the main theme
Yeah,
of
there's macro connection and then there's micro segmentation.
self education, and the particular lessons or articles could be extracted from this. So yeah, I see that in a perfect way as we uh, talked about the education, where you could choose where you go based on what you feel. And the same, I see the teaching books should be structured that you could use any chapter separately. And the same is fine to structure how we do this.
Well, it works for the dictionary at the
Let's
very
wrap up.
least. Like it's not, you don't gain anything by reading the dictionary in order.
Not not a dictionary, but rather a reference manual,
Hmm.
maybe. A
Hmm. Well, it came to
dictionary.
my mind. It's just like,
Mhm.
what's an example of a book where you don't have to read it in order?
Yes, yes, yes. The book that works, but uh, still, it could be a book with a structure, with a path that you could read from cover to cover. But still, if it is not a fiction, but non-fiction that teaches you something, every chapter should be structured independently as well.
Hmm.
And maybe in every chapter, every idea should be easily accessible because you cannot read a big book and remember everything. So, even in this podcast, I believe different people will remember different interesting ideas. And I want spread the ideas that will help people. And it takes time for the ideas to grow up in certain heads. So this is a completely random process, and we are returning to the same ideas again and again and again just to make it work for as much people as possible.
Hmm. And it's one idea changes when brought up in different contexts too. So ideas are worth exploring just as much as they're worth re-exploring. And that's going to be the last word out of me. Pavel, thank you for your expertise. If you would like to find me online, you can search for JOSEPH IANNI on LinkedIn, and feel free to ask me any questions that you might have in relation to web media. It's what I do. I'm here to help. And if you want to talk to Pavel, Pavel is most active on X right now. That is PAVELKRGN. So once again, thank you for putting this project together. Happy to be on it. Happy to do my part to help get messages out there. And we'll see you all next time.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Joseph. See you.